This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
I did for a while, yeah, and it was quite sort of new in terms of the topic in property, and I did it really just as, it started off like one of those papers that I did on the leasing centres, just as a general point of interest, and then the Green Building Council picked it up and they wanted to pay me to do some work, so I did that. And it was very good for profile and lectures and all of those types of things. But it wasn't particularly good for making money. So I was getting a lot of offers to talk, but or speak on the subject, but it wasn't generating very much work. So there's only so much you can do. I wasn't really a professional presenter. So I refreshed my research a couple of times. But beyond that, I sort of dropped, actively promoting myself in this space probably 4 or 5 years ago. And there's others out there that are doing their thing and have their point of view and do their area of research on it. So I think do it. So probably active in the space for about sort of 5 or 7 years. So, it's interesting. It does take time. Yeah, that's right. And I basically sort of came to the conclusion that people go looking for the silver bullet in this, and there really is no silver bullet. It's a combination of things that make it worthwhile. I think the more interesting sort of parallel subject, though, is the impact of climate change on property. Because it has a potentially massive impact, much more than sustainability. Totally. Absolutely. Yeah, I was in Hobart just a week before last, looking at the Hobart airport. It's 2 metres above the sea level. You're not a metre and a half above the sea level. It's really low, So, there doesn't have to be much change there. The other class starting to feed in, fill out the numbers a bit. Oh, in here?
quick one. Quick introduction. All right. Okay, so tonight's topic is on rental review and rental determination. So we're very lucky to have Richard here. So I think it's one of the authorities on this topic. Richard is with EY, so he's a partner there. So I think in addition to today's specialist topic, there must be a lot of insights from professional practice as well and the market dynamics. So shall we welcome Richard for tonight's topic?
Thank you everybody. Did you want me pinned up with anything to record?
That's right. Okay. They probably just do it through that thing.
All right.
It's kind of automatic.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks very much for the invitation to present tonight. So, my name's Richard Bowman. I'm a partner with Ernst & Young, and I've been a property valuer now for about 25 years. So, I started when there was a course only at RMIT, and worked through the property valuation course there, and in the third year got a job with a fellow by the name of Brendan Rice. And Brendan was a sole practitioner at the time, and he did a lot of work in the area of rental determination. So a lot of people went to him specifically to assist when there was disputes around between landlords and tenants, specifically with regards to rent and rent for properties. And so I started off as his understudy probably 25 years ago in the area of rents and rental determinations. And from that point forward, I've done probably about 50 or so large-scale rental determinations. And when I talk about a rental determination of scale, I'm talking about like a whole city office building. And if I'm not being the umpire, being the determining valuer, I'm often providing submissions. So my clients can be the landlords or the tenants, and I assist in putting forward their point of view when it comes to rental determinations. So I thought what might be useful for you this afternoon was to talk a little bit about the history about rental determinations and why they exist and why it's an area of property valuation. And then I'm going to take you through a recent determination which I've done of a building in Adelaide. And I've brought along my whole determination paper today. We'll step through some of the issues that arose during that determination. I can tell you why I made certain decisions, and I'll show you how a completed report gets put together and then gets issued to both of the parties. So let me just give you a bit of context about rental determinations. Firstly, a rental determination is ultimately a cheaper version or a more basic version of what happens when you go to court. Okay? There will be a dispute that has arisen before a determining valuer like myself gets appointed, and it will be a dispute generally over what is the rental value of the property. There will be the landlord who will most often be on the high side. They'll think that they've got a fantastic property that's worth double, what the tenant thinks, and the lease will be generally the mechanism by which they then seek to come together and try and resolve that dispute. And often it can be a situation before it gets to a determination where they may have met. They may discuss the situation between each other. They may have laid out the differences, but they can't still get to a conclusion or in fact to an agreement as to what the rent ought to be from the next market rent review period. So if they're still at that point, they can't agree, what they'll then do, subject to what the lease says, is they'll then come to an independent expert like myself, think of myself as a judge in the process, and say, right, we can't agree. You say it's $1,000 a year. Landlord, we the tenants say, it's $800 a year. Here's what we both believe. Can you make a final decision for us? And that decision is final and binding on both of the parties, unless I've made an error. some sort of error in calculation. But once I've given my opinion as the determining valuer, they then have to abide by that and they move forward. And so it's a quick, effective and skillful way of getting a practitioner like myself to deal with an issue that would otherwise run through somewhere like the Supreme Court or through VCAT. Okay? You get somebody who's skilled in the area, who knows the market. It can get turned around much more quickly and a lot more cheaply. So it's often used as a way of resolving issues. The other important thing to understand too is that the need for rental determinations really do arise because of the leases that get entered into between landlords and tenants, and big landlords and tenants are often for long-term periods. Okay, they can be for 5 years, 10 years, 20 or even up to 50 years. And those landlords and tenants want those rents to keep pace with market. Okay, so they can have an annual increase in them. That annual increase might be a CPI increase, or it might be a percentage increase. But generally it's sometime through that lease there'll be a market rent review. And that is because at the time of when they entered into the lease, a 3% increase might have sounded normal. But if we go through a high inflation environment, a 3% increase may in fact be suboptimal. And so they use the rent review process as a catch-up, okay, as a catch-up through the lease. And what I mean by that, so let's take a profile very quickly. If we take a profile of a lease, and it might be over sort of year 1, year 5, year 10 and year 15. If the rent starts off at $100 and has 3% increases in it, it's going to do this type of profile, okay, rising at 3% every time. Okay? Rising at 3% every time. But a fixed 3% increase for 15 years is, it's good, it's predictable, okay, but if inflation, for example, through the period, maybe steps up, maybe it's quite low here, we're a low inflation environment, but we're talking about future dates, maybe we get out to a period of, 2025, we don't know that inflation is not going to do something like that, okay? So most leases, and I'm talking about most, 90% of the leases, will have these fixed reviews, have these market reviews, maybe in the 5th year, maybe in the 10th year, and maybe again in the 15th year. And that will allow the catch-up between the market, between the passing rent and the market rent, the market reset, right? So in this situation, what I've drawn is that at the 5th year, the rent might actually come down. Okay, the market hasn't been growing as fast as the lease, right? At the 10th year, same situation, but maybe if we roll forward to the 15th year, it's under. So it allows these kind of continual catch-ups. Who decides this? This is what we do. This is what I do as determining valuer. But not all rents go to determination, okay? There's probably only about 10 or 15%, I would say, would end up in a situation where they need somebody to actually determine the rent. All right, any questions, just sort of on context and anything like that? Why we sort of do valuations or why we do rent reviews? All good? Okay. The other thing I want to touch on before I get into my example is the importance of the lease. Okay? Think of a lease as a contract between a landlord and a tenant, and when they enter into a lease, they set down the agreement between the two parties, and that agreement will cover things such as who's responsible for the payment of the electricity, who's responsible to repair the building, who's responsible to insure the building, how much should the rent be paid every year, what's the space that you occupy. And these leases end up as quite significant size documents. You know, I've seen some of them run at, 50 pages, and they have variations as they're changed all the way through their life. But what they're doing is they're sitting down and recording exactly what the landlord and the tenant are trying to agree as to how they want the land to be used for that period. So when I get the determination, when I get the request for the determination, that's the single most important document that I'm looking at is the lease, because that tells me everything that I need to know about the rights and obligations of both the landlord and the tenant. And so what my job is to strike the rent, knowing that the lessee has to pay not only the rent for the building, but has to pay the costs. At the end of the lease, the landlord has to repair the building after any damage has been done by the tenant. Okay, so the determining rent can't be made absent of the lease. It must be made having full regard to the lease and all of its rights and obligations. Okay, so if there's anything that you do with a rental determination or you're involved in any rent work at all, get hold of the lease, read it in full, and start from that position. All right. One final thing for a little bit of context too. With rental determinations, it's often the case that not everything is in dispute. The end rent might be in dispute. The landlord might think it's $100 and the tenant might think it's $50. But in fact, the reasons leading to that difference are critical in my role as the determining valuer. There may only be one or two reasons for that difference. So what I do when I'm looking at doing a determination, I'm very much focusing in on what are the reasons for the difference. Okay, so I can target my work. So I'm not an arbitrator. My job is not to pull the parties together to sit them down and try and work them out like, husband and wife, they're going through marriage difficulties. I'm not trying to solve their problems. Right? I'm in there as an expert. So my job is to come down, is to read all of the facts like a judge and make a decision on everything that's presented to me as the determining valuer. Okay? So 3 points, just really quickly. Understand the purpose of the determination. Obtain the copy of the lease. Understand that that's the contract between the landlord and the tenant and has everything in it. And thirdly, your job is to act as an expert and not an arbitrator. Okay, you don't have to solve their problems, you just have to determine the rent. Okay. Let's get into this. So this is what we'll cover tonight. Sorry. This is what we'll cover tonight. And this is what we're going to go through. This is one of my determinations, which I did for a property in Franklin Street, Adelaide. So this is Adelaide's largest tenancy. That's the Australian Tax Office. If you ever get any mail from the Australian Tax Office, it probably comes from this premises in Adelaide. Now, I'm going to put a lot of information up here on the screen in my determination, much of which is confidential. Okay, so I can't give you this determination. What I'll do is I'll give you a bit of a summary of it afterwards. I've been in Fiji for the last week having a lovely holiday. If I hadn't been in Fiji, I probably would have given you a nice summary that I would have put up on the screen, but we're going to go with a copy of my determination. Okay, so this is what I issue to the party. So let's have a quick look. Okay, and I understand it's very small, so apologies, I'll paraphrase some of this for you. The first thing I'm doing with my determination is... Whoa, sorry. Let's try again. First thing I'm doing with my determination... That's better. Is I'm issuing it to both parties. Okay? So determination... I'm not acting for a party, all right? I'm not giving it to one side. It's binding on both sides. So this is going simultaneously to the landlord and the tenant, emailed at exactly the same time. In this, I'm summarising my clients, which are in this case, the Trust Company of Australia, and in this case, the Australian Taxation Office. So they're the tenant and they are the landlord. And I'm referencing my engagement, which is to act as the valuer in clause 7 of the lease to determine the rent in accordance with the terms of the lease. Okay? And I'll run you through the key matters in this particular determination. The first is the relevant date. Okay, so what is the actual date that we're doing the determination? In this case, it's the 1st of November 2017. It's relevant because the market moves over time, right? We might have deals that are done earlier or we might have deals that are done later, but if the market's moving, we need to adjust back to 2017. The second relevant matter to the determination is the premises. In this case, it's 12 to 26 Franklin Street in Adelaide. It's a premium grade office tower. It was built in 2012 and it was leased from new by the Australian Taxation Office. The building comprises some retail accommodation on the ground floor, 17 upper levels of offices, secure car parking and storage in the basement area. It's got a NABERS rating of 5.5 stars. The building has a lettable area of 30,979 square metres. Okay, over the mezzanine, plus 508.4 square metres in the basement and 67 car bays. The reason why that is relevant, because in the determination which I've done here, I've calculated the rental on a per square metre basis. Okay, so the mathematics in calculating the overall rental that I determine is the area that they occupy multiplied by the rate per square metre that's determined from market evidence. Okay, and the reason why you see me carve out or separately identify office area versus storage area versus car parks is because each one of those are different quality accommodation that command different rental rates in the market. Okay. I note here that prior to the determination, the rent was 18.66 million per annum. For the office area, $73,000 per annum for the storage, and the car bays are leased at $463 per month. Okay. Now you can see going into the determination that the landlord, so Andrew Lett, if anybody working at CBREs? No? Okay, Andrew Lett, excellent value at CBREs, does all of the office work. He was putting forward for the for the landlord, that the rent should have been about 18.9 million. Call it 19 million. Okay? Nathan Robbins, who works at Cushman and Wakefield, he was acting for the tenant. His view was the rent should be about 16.798 million. Okay? So, percentage-wise, they're not that far apart. Okay, they're about 10% apart. But, when you're playing with, what's that, 2.3 million, plus a little bit for storage and car parking, you can see that, for a landlord, 2.3 million is a substantial annual amount. And so that was the difference. That was the difference between the two values. Okay. In the lease, it was written under clause 7.4 that if there was a dispute between the two parties, the landlord and the tenant, that my job was to determine the open market rental value of the premises at the market review date. Remember we said that was the 1st of November 2017. And subject to the specific directions, determine the lease. Now, in this case, there was no definition as to the open market rental value. Sometimes there is. Sometimes there is things such as, the open market rental value, but assuming the building's full of fixtures and fittings like office chairs, tables and other things. Okay? But in this case there wasn't. I was just told to do the open market rental value. And what I've done here is I've basically adopted the market rental definition by the API. Okay. I've determined a rental on an effective basis, and I'll come back to effective rents shortly, whereby I've taken into account incentives in the market. But interestingly, that wasn't the area of dispute between between the landlords and tenant. Both valuers agreed that this was an effective review. They did disagree, the landlord and the tenant, as to how an incentive should be treated in the calculation of the rent. Interestingly, when the tax office went into this building, they were given $25 million by the landlord as a lease incentive. Okay. It's not uncommon, in fact it's quite common to give lease incentives. The question is though, when you come to the market rent review in the 5th year, how should that be factored into account? Should you ignore that they've given them $25 million at the beginning of the lease, or should you make some calculation, some adjustment in the rent to pay back that $25 million? That point was in dispute between the two parties. Now, I'll come back to this later too, but given the seriousness of the outcome around the difference on this point, and I was presented with legal letters from some of the top barristers and solicitors in Melbourne on this topic, and both of them were contrary. You know, were telling me to do different things. Okay, and seeing I wasn't a lawyer, seeing I'm not a lawyer, I didn't want to try and interpret these words myself in the lease. What I did is I went and employed a QC, and I said to her name's Lisa Hannon, she's mentioned here, I said to Lisa, I've got this situation, the words are a little ambiguous in terms of how I should apply the lease. Calculation has to do with the tenant's incentive. Can you help me? And I'll show you in a moment how I wrote to her, she wrote to me, and gave me some direction on this point as a legal, some legal direction on how to do this. The next issue had to do with a clause in the lease that basically said that, as at this market rent review date, the rent actually cannot go up by more than 110% of the prior year's rent, or down by more than 90% on the prior year's rent. Okay, so in order to provide a bit of a protection around the time of rent increases, it's not uncommon for landlords and tenants to say, okay, well, let's say the market rent does fall. Let's say we get to a situation like this, where we've got the passing rent up here and the market rent down here. Okay, and we've got somebody who's advocating that the rent should, in fact, rise considerably. So often in this situation, it was written in such a way to say the rent can't go up by more than 10% after the review, or down by more than 10%. Okay, and it's just a kind of a mechanism to take into account any upside or downside risk. I assessed the rent to be $491.14 per square metre for the office accommodation, $150 per square metre for the storage, and $500 per bay for the car parking spaces. And in this case, right, I determined the total market rent effective from the 1st of November to be $15.693 million per annum. Okay. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that the rent that I determined is actually not within the range of these two. It's actually lower than the end of the tenant. Maybe they would have been better sorting it out than coming to me. But in the fact, what ends up happening is that the rent can't go down by more than 10%. So though the landlord was actually saved by the 10% fall. So that's the kind of summary of the determination. That's the summary of the issues. I'm going to take you through a couple of these things in more detail. You can stop me and ask any questions. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to ask at this point? Right. So just to recap, I've read the lease. It's told me what to do. I've determined the facts of the property. How much space are we dealing with? How many car parks? What's the storage area? I've worked out the issues that I think are relevant and what the points of difference are between the two valuers. I've then made my investigations of the market, and then I've provided my determination and issued it in writing. Okay. So there we have it. So I sign it off and away she goes. So that's the completed report. So this is how a report looks in terms of its table of contents. The premises is really just for a matter of record. What are we dealing with? The lease, I will summarise the relevant clauses for the determination. I'll drill down into the rental review provisions, in particular the specific wording. The submissions looks at the landlord and the tenant, what they're saying and what my view is of what they're saying in their issues. I'll look at the market in terms of how it's tracking over time, how much supply, how much demand, what's happening in the local market. I'll then look at particular deals. I'll provide the basis of my determination calculation, a sign-off, and then any appendices. Okay, so anyone picking up a determination like this should be able to read this through from start to finish in terms of what I've done. So let's have a look. A lot of words on this page, but don't worry too much. It's simply recording the facts of the building. It's quite a good A-grade or premium building in Adelaide. Like I said, it's only about 7 years old. When I read through the submissions, there was no dispute as to the quality of the building, its size, its condition, its environmental rating. Both parties totally agreed. And there really shouldn't be any difference. Do you know what I mean? I mean, these are matters of fact. So if I had one person telling me that the building was larger than the other party, what could I do? What would I do about that? Any suggestions? If one party was saying, look, we think the building is double the size of the other, any ideas? I could resolve that and get a survey, right? Couldn't I? I could go out, get a surveyor. So one party says it's 30,000 square metres, the other says it's 15,000 square metres. Go back and, establish the facts. One party says I lease 50 car bays, the other party says I only lease 40 car bays. Show me the evidence. So you need to establish the facts early on, right? So this really just appears here as a matter of record, essentially. You can see, really good quality building, typical open plan, located in the CBD, close to rail, blah, 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 everything that's important. In this case, the lease was quite good. It actually had plans. It showed how, the size of each of the floors. You can see it here on the right-hand side in blue. Obviously, that's probably too small for you to see. But it actually records the area of 1769 square metres. Okay. And the area that's being leased is the blue area. So this is a fantastic plan to attach to the lease. It shows the common areas in yellow. It shows the blue areas that are occupied, and it's been put together, I think. I can't tell if that's an architect or that is the surveyor, but nonetheless it's attached to the lease. and it also says that the lease has been prepared in accordance with the Property Council of Australia method of measurement for net lettable area. So now what I know is not just the size of the building as it's been told to me, but I've seen the plans. I know exactly, the method of calculation, and I know that the calculation for this type of property has been done correctly. It's NLA. There is different methods of measurement depending upon whether you're dealing with industrial property or retail property, but net lettable area is what we've got. In fact, I was able to find the exact area of all the building right through all 17 levels. Okay. Here I've summarised the lease. It dates from 2013. There's a deed of licence which came in regarding a rooftop terrace. There was then a side deed done in 2014, a licence for a lobby, and then a deed of covenant between Charter Hall and the ATO for a balcony licence. Okay? But the essential terms are these. The landlord, the tenant, who's the ATO, the premises, which is actually defined here in the lease, the commencing date, the term of 15 years, so very similar to what I drew on the board, the options, what the rent was commencing and what the rent is currently, and this is essentially the instructions that are given to me to determine the lease. So basically here it says there's fixed review dates subject to 103.75% escalation on November 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20 and 21, 23, 24, 25 and 26. And there's a market review on the 1st of November 2017 and the 1st of November 2012. So there's 5 yearly market reviews. Now clause 7 in the lease sets out the rent review provisions for each market review. Okay, it tells me that a market rent review shall take into account the terms and conditions generally of the lease, and more specifically, clause 7.4.5 sets out the following specific directions, i.e. the determining valuer must determine the open market rental value of the premises at the market review date, assuming. And these are all the assumptions that are given to me as the determining valuer. And I want to read through these. It's a bit dry, I'm sorry, but I'll take you through them, and we'll talk to you a little bit about what each of them are. Okay, so the first one is the landlord is a willing but not anxious landlord, and the tenant is a willing but not anxious tenant. All right, sounds pretty standard. Is everybody familiar with the Spencer definition of market value? Up, down, yeah, good. Right, willing tenant, willing landlord, right? Not one of them's not acting like they're going to pay a premium, and one of them's saying, no, I'm going to negotiate a discount on this. There's a coming together of price, right? Both of them acting in such a way that they want to do the deal rather than not do the deal. Right, the second one is that the market rent at the review date is not an acknowledgement. The rent at the market review date is not an acknowledgement by the parties of the current rental value. So it's telling me to completely ignore what's being paid. So I have the right to be higher and be lower, but I must not put forward that just because they're paying that rent, that is the market rent. Okay? It's in fact telling me to ignore that. The third point, okay, is that the premises are available with vacant possession. Okay. So that is that a new tenant is coming along to lease the property that is currently vacant. Why might that be important? Anybody have a view? Why might the rent be different if it was a vacant property as opposed to if it was an occupied property? Yeah? Think about the cost of moving. If you're on a property and somebody says to you, you have to move, and it's going to cost you $5 million to move, do you think you're likely to pay more rent to stay there? You are, right? It's going to be cheaper to stay than it is to go. But this is telling us that we must have regard to properties which were assumed, even though they're occupation, we're assumed that they're coming along and the property is vacant. Okay? If you're a landlord with a vacant property, you're likely to be more eager to lease the property than if it's hypothetically you've got a sitting tenant. The answer is you are. In practice, what you see is that tenants negotiate better deals when the landlord doesn't have a tenant in place. Okay? The fourth point, the open market rental value, other than rental value, is determined by fixed CPI or other indexed escalations at the market review date of comparable premises in the building or in the vicinity of town, blah, 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 blah. Not relevant. The permitted use of the premises. Okay, so in this case the permitted use is offices, we must compare to offices. The periods between the market review date or the next market review date. Okay, so if you're, say for example, got no increase in a lease and only a market rent review every 5th year, you're going to want that market review every 5th year to be quite significant to make up for the intervening periods where there's no increase. Okay, so it's telling me to have regard to, or think about how the lease is written. The increased value due to the lessor repainting and recarpeting. Okay, pretty obvious. The restrictions on the use of assignment or subletting. The terms and conditions of the lease generally. The next one here deals with any rent-free period, financial contribution or other concession likely to be offered to the new tenants of comparable premises, considered by the valuer when making his or her determination, whether under the lease or other documentation, to the extent that it's resulted in an increase in the rent payable under the lease, considered by the valuer. Okay, that is called an effective rent review clause. Quick show of hands, who needs a quick 101 on effective versus face rents? Yeah? Will I do a quick one on the board? Yep, right. Can everybody see? Is that right level? I don't want to throw it up too high, otherwise it'll get. So let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. All right. So really simply, you'll hear that, let's say for example we've got a 5-year lease. Okay? In red, year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you pick up the lease, it basically says that the tenant from year 1 pays $100, and in year 2 it goes 105, 110, 15, 20, 25, right? Okay. Now, there's no deductions or anything like that made under that lease. Okay, that is typically called a face rent. Okay, it's the amount that you'll see under the contract. It may be, if you roll forward to the third year, it's the amount being paid. It might be the amount in the ad that you see when you're reading the real estate agent. Okay, but it's not what happens in the real world. In the real world, when you're dealing with leases of the type that I was dealing with here. In the real world, what happens is that the landlords provide incentives to the tenants to come along and move into their premises. And some of them can be quite material, okay? In this situation, I'll go back to the situation up here, but it's not uncommon. For the first 2 years of a 5-year rent, for the tenant to pay no rent at all, okay? So what it'll say first 2 years rent-free. Okay? And you'd say, well, why would a landlord, provide 2 years, no rent, and then only start collecting rent from the third year? Well, what they've done is an NPV over the cost-benefit of doing that calculation, right? Because we can quickly work out that the NPV of this, and I'll do it really quickly off the top of my head, but let's say that's 500, 515, 530, 550, yeah, undiscounted, that cash flow, right? And if we take off 210, what did I say, 550, undiscounted, right? And the incentives here are 205. Right? So $345, if I can do my maths correctly, undiscounted, right, is in fact what the landlord is receiving over that 5-year cash flow because they're giving away 2 years rent free. Okay? That is called the face rent, right? That is called the incentive, and that is called the effective rent. Right? This is fundamental to valuations or determinations or leasehold interests, okay? In this situation, if we're talking about what are incentives running at, right? In this situation, somebody got a calculator on an iPhone? Can somebody just do the 205 divided by 550? What's that as a percentage? 40%, someone? Is that about 40%? 37%? Right. That is a lease which has a 37% incentive. Okay? The alternative, right, to the landlord and the tenant is not to do a deal that has a deduction like that in it. The alternative is to say, we'll blow that. Just give us one that equals 345 over the 5 years. How would you do that? Quickly again, 345 divided by 5? 69. Call it 70, right? We could do an effective lease, right? And I'm not discounting or anything like that, but you know what I'm trying to get to. That is basically, it could be 70, like that, or it could start maybe at 60, 67, 68, whatever it is. But that's basically how, the other alternative is. But in most situations, this is quite common, okay? And so read again part J in this. Okay. Right. So I must have regard to, tells me I must have regard to any rent-free period, financial contribution, including any contribution towards fit-out cost, or other concession, customarily or likely to be offered to new tenants of comparable vacant premise, considered by the valuer when making his or her determination whether under the lease or other documentation to the extent that, in the opinion of the valuer, has resulted in an increase in the rent being paid, so the rent payable under the lease considered by the valuer. Okay? So it's telling me to have regard to this situation. Why is it important? For two reasons. One, the tenant was given $25 million to move in as a contribution. Right? So I must have regard to that. The second thing is, I must also have regard to what other tenants are paying in the market. And my job in this one, okay, was not to return this number, the face rent, but was to return this number. Okay? That's what I was told. And in fact, that was in agreement. Both parties, both the landlord and the tenant, agreed that that was the intention. Okay? Now, it's often the case that I'm actually being instructed as the determining valuer to do this one. Okay? To do the face rent, but not in this case. Okay? So, this is why sort of reading this, you know, is so important. All right. Okay. Now, it also tells me not to take into account certain things. So in this case, it says, don't take into account the condition, any adverse effect on the condition of the property as a result of a breach by the tenant. So let's say, for example, I walked through the building, the ceiling had fallen in because the tenant had decided to, I don't know, let off fire extinguishers during the daytime and ruin the plaster in the building. Okay? Ignore it. Assume that the building is in good condition and they hadn't done anything which had adversely impacted the property. Right? The second thing, any fittings or other improvements or alterations installed or made to the premises by the tenant, its subtenants or predecessors in title. So, let's think about the gates, those security gates that I showed in the picture on the way in. Okay? If the tenant has done those, that's their work. They shouldn't be paying rent on it. Okay? I've been told in this situation, assume that they're not there. Assume if they've got significant AV equipment. Let's talk about these screens and sliding boards. Right? That's the tenant's equipment. Don't take that into account in your valuation. Assume that it's not there. Okay? Any increase in the value of the property, value of the premises as a result of any structural alterations by the landlord carried out at its discretion for any reason. So, can't think how that implied in this situation, but it's there. Any special interest of the tenant, its subtenants or respective predecessors in title, including the fact that the tenant is a sitting tenant. So let's say, for example, the ATO had a whole lot of infrastructure, computer IT equipment. It ran cables into the building that made it special for its purpose. Should I have regard to that or should I not have regard to that? Anybody got a view? Should not have regard to it, I've been told, but not taking into account any special value. Okay? Any goodwill? Okay? People often know that, the Commonwealth Bank is located at 357 Collins Street, Melbourne. How long? It's been there 100 plus years. It's created goodwill. We all know it's there. We all go and bank there. Should they pay more rent because everybody knows that's where the Commonwealth Bank's located? They shouldn't. I'm being told to ignore that. Don't ignore goodwill. A really important one for things like retail tenants. Okay? And everybody knows that you can have regard to, say, for example, the fact that it might be on a corner. It's a good location, that's fine, but it's not the corner that is always occupied by KFC. Okay? Even though it might be known around town as the KFC corner, you're forgetting the tenant's goodwill, right? Any right of the tenant to use any part of the building or the land other than the net lettable area and car parking bays. So I've been told to only do the areas that are set out under the lease. And finally, whatever I do determine, like I said, the rent can't go up by more than 10% or down by more than 10% after that. So they're my rules, okay? That's my scope. That's what I've got to determine a rent in accordance with those rules. Any questions at this point about the job? Yeah? All right. I suppose the question is kind of how do you interpret all of these things vis-a-vis the evidence, and I'll come to that quickly, but I hope you're sort of getting a bit of a picture. Yes, mate?
Was there any instance that one of the parties took you to BCAT to object your determination?
Can they?
Yeah.
A very good question. I only take these determinations on the basis that they abide by the decision. And they're very happy with that because they've often got to such a point where they can't agree themselves, and this is the only way, short of taking it to the court, that they can get someone to be the umpire. So I said, look, this is the basis under which I'll do it. Now, they do have a clawback. If I've actually made a mathematical error, right, or I've made, the building says it's 30,000 square metres and I've applied 15,000 square metres for some stupid reason. But, if I think it's better or worse than other deals in the market or whatever, and that's my opinion, they really have very little. They have very little ability to. But the stakes are high when you do these jobs because they already hate each other. They're already fighting. Do you know what I mean? So I charge very handsomely for jobs like this. Trust me. Because at the end of the day, you're generally not making one party happy. Probably both parties are pretty pissed off. They're kind of, he's got it wrong. He said it was his. So it's a tricky little area of work. All right. These leases are, like I said, 50 pages long. I just wanted to pull out a couple of points. Outgoings, it tells me who's responsible. This is a gross lease. Why is that important? Because I've got to, when I'm comparing it to other buildings, I've got to remember that some deals might have been done on a net basis. This one's got to be done on a gross basis. The GST, how it's worked. Who's responsible for maintenance, repairs. Make good is another one. Make good is what you have to do at the end of the lease when you move out. The costs can be considerable. Look around you, think what it would cost to reinstate this building maybe back to a flat room suitable for offices, right? You'd have to take out all of the seating, you'd have to level the floors, take out the AV equipment. Once you've done that, you've got to repaint it, These are really big costs at the end of the leases. Who's the person who's responsible for those costs? If you're not paying for it in the rent, then you may be paying it for at the end of the rent, If you're ever entering into a lease, make sure you don't, agree to take on the make good. But what I do is, I'm looking at the total cost to the tenant. I'm looking at how much rent they're paying, how much outgoings they're paying, who's responsible for these things at the end. Okay. Redecoration, it says that the landlord must repaint. Assignment. In this case, nobody else can move into the building unless unless the tax office says it's okay. Is it relevant? Probably not, but I put it in there. Here's this landlord's contribution. Okay, it tells me in this that they've paid $18.4 million. And that the total sum of this plus other obligations totals $25.8 to $6 million. Okay? And it's telling me to have regard to this in the lease. So, what I'm doing here in this section of the report, I'm distilling everything that I think is relevant to the determination. And I'm sort of trying to then I'll then take this information, take what I know under this lease, and then I'll make sure I apply the rules correctly, And then when I do my comparison to the other comparables in the market, I'm going to get them all and line them all up on the same basis, yeah? So gross for gross. No make good, no make good. Rent reviews, similar rent reviews. So you can get everything as similar as you can, and then you can reach your conclusion. Any questions on the lease? How to interpret it? Any of the terms that I used in that people don't understand? Everybody familiar now with the face versus effective terms? Good. Exam questions? Right. I'm just going to stick with the instructions a little bit more, and I'll get into the numbers. What I've done here is I've drawn out all of these issues and I'm telling the reader as to how I'm interpreting absolutely everything. Okay? I'm going to jump onto this one. I told you about I got the QC involved in this one because there was some wording that wasn't clear. This is it, section 3.4 of my report. Clause 7.8 in the lease states that the tenant acknowledges receipt of the landlord's contribution. So they acknowledge that they've received that $25 million. Okay, the landlord's contribution is noted in clause 1.1 of the lease and is qualified on page 14 of this, quantified on page 14 of this report. And I call it out that the landlord and the tenant differ in the opinion of the treatment of the landlord's contribution. Andrew Lett for CBRE contends that the landlord's contribution should be taken into account when assessing the rent. Furthermore, they've provided me letters from a partner at HSF. You know, I mean, these are rolled gold lawyers in Melbourne, and David Batt QC. So they've come out with a heavy ammo on the opinion, on their opinion. The Cushman and Wakefield Valuer has submitted that the land's contribution is not relevant to the assessment of the open market rental value. Okay. Show of hands, after what we've read in the lease and what I've talked to you about, those who think that the landlord's contribution is a relevant factor in the determination? Relevant, put your hand up. Those who don't think it's relevant and I should ignore it, who's on the side of the tenant? Those who don't care? All right. Okay, it seems like the don't care category is probably a winner. But, hey, we're dealing with a significant difference. The point here, like I said, they've got a QC letter that they're throwing at me. So I thought, righto, I can lawyer up as well. Went and got Lisa Hannon, and I said, Lisa, help. And so I wrote her these series of questions, and here's my question and answer. And I basically said, look, in undertaking my role as the determining valuer, am I required to have regard to the landlord's contribution provided to the tenant at the commencement of the lease when determining the rent? And Lisa's lovely, but of course she's a QC, so she writes a lot. I just went straight to the answer, which is, in short, the answer to question one is yes. So, yeah, all right, she's telling me that I must have regard to that. Question two, if the answer to question one is yes, does the lease provide any guidance as to the methodology to be used by the determining valuer in bringing the landlord's contribution into account when determining the rent? She says specifically, no, it doesn't. Okay, there are no instructions other than you must have regard to it. And that's great, because I can't stuff up at this point. I'm the valuer, I'm the expert, they've signed the agreement, they've said they won't sue me over the answer. I pretty much can do what I want, and I can't be wrong. So that's all good. The third one, if the answer to question one is no, is there any legal precedents that give guidance as to how, in the context of this lease, in determining the rent, the value is to take into account the landlord's contribution? She's come back, she's also said no, there's no court cases that she knows that I should pre-read or follow or precedent any of that sort of stuff, right? So pretty clear at this point where I'm going with this. I'm going to take it into account. I've not been told there's any particular way I have to do it, other than it's up and it's open to me. Okay. Let's have a look. I think I've talked through most of these points. New lettings with vacant possession or in respect of occupied premises. Really important one. I'll get to this point why, but vacant versus occupied. Annual rent. The rent goes up at 3.75% per annum. Who thinks 3.75 is good? Who thinks it's no good? Who thinks it's kind of alright? Anybody got an opinion? It's probably not bad at the moment. You know, what's CPI run at? 2.5, 2, sort of stuff. 3.75, you're doing CPI plus, not 2 times over CPI, 1.5 times CPI. It's probably pretty good, I've seen these things, go at 6 and 7% per annum, because they've been written back at times when inflation was a lot higher. They might be 20 years old. Okay. I won't worry about the assumed lease term. Whole of premises review. This is an interesting one. So I've specifically been told that I must have regard to the fact that this is a whole of premises lease. What does that mean? It means I'm not assuming that 17 tenants are coming along leasing 17 floors. Okay? I'm assuming that I have one tenant leasing the entire 17 floors. Why is it relevant? Well, you might get a discount if you're leasing in bulk, right? If you buy anything in bulk, you get a discount. There might also be a premium too. Scarcity, one premises available, multiple tenants, you want the space, you pay a premium, right? I don't know what the answer to that is, but all I'm being told is to have regard to the whole of the premises. So what's that mean? When I go and have a look at the comparable evidence, I'm going to look at their leasings of whole other buildings. I'm not going to look at the leasings of individual floors. Absence of reinstatement or make good clause. It doesn't have one, this lease. Significant cost saving for the tenant at the end. Other leases might. When I do a financial comparison of those two leases, which one should be higher? The one that doesn't have the make good clause, right? Because they've got cost savings at the end. GST, pretty standard, but I've been told to do it on a GST exclusive basis. Not always the case. Retail's often GST inclusive. And then this cap and collar that I basically said. All right, we're approaching 7:30. I've probably got about another 30 minutes to run through. Should we take a 5-minute break? I'll have a sip of water. We'll take a 5-minute break, and if anybody needs a bathroom break, we'll then just get going again.
Yeah, it's actually good timing because there's a student announcement. It takes 2 minutes.
Done.
Yeah, so
Were you going to say something? Yeah, I think that's you.
That works because my USB doesn't fit. But what's this big cord here for? The clear one.
Well,
Because these are for the keyboard and mouse.
no, just it's an extension. So this will be a bloody thing.
Preview works sometimes. So I don't know why. There's always this login.
So you need to open this.
Yeah, I was on. Because it'll come up with like login.
I see. So you can cross it.
If you just go back
Or just continue with Google.
Can you minimize that? Try the little one where there we go, this is better. Alright, hello everyone. Hi, Trump. Hello everyone. I'm Jeremy. I'm from the Built Industry Group. I'm just going to quickly talk about our upcoming events this Thursday, 6 p.m. in the MSD basement. So it's called the Masters Social Night. So what is the Masters Social Night? So our idea with this event is to encourage developing students' peer-to-peer network at uni, because in industry it's a lot of who you know, and so we figured that it all starts at university, and so being able to develop your network here in time for classes before the industry can be very beneficial later on. So our main thing is how many of us actually know someone else studying a different discipline under the MSD umbrella. So how many do you know in architecture, how many do you know in construction, landscape architecture, planning, and in property? Because it's all under the built environment scope, but then again we don't really interact with these disciplines because they are separate. So again, it was about who you know. Because in the end, like, you work on projects, you might have someone you're familiar with from university who studied architecture, and some who do construction as well. So again, it's all to establish and grow your future network. So the idea is it's supposed to be a social and a fun environment with free food and drinks, alcohol as well, some like little games to get people talking. Because again, it's all about making that connection in terms of becoming familiar with people already at uni. And it is right before the mid-semester break, so it's a good time just to get a bit of R&R, rest and relaxation, right before studying over the break. So all the details are here. Please register now at the link up there. It should be on the LMS, but yes, 6 p.m. this Thursday, MSD basement. Hope to see you there. I'm not sure what else to say, but that is all. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's already there.
Over there.
Oh, perfect.
Good. Thanks everybody, and thanks for keeping with me. It can be pretty dry, this topic, but and also pretty detailed. So appreciate you keeping up. And by the way, I'll make myself available afterwards if anybody wants to ask or have any particular questions as well too. Okay, I'll fly through this a little bit because everybody loves an early night, so do I, and give you a bit of a rundown what we've got on the screen at the moment, and that is the summary of where the two valuers are in their submissions to me, because they generally write to me as the determining valuer and put their position forward. In this case, as I said, one of them was at 18.99 million, the other at 16.7 million. And I then talk about where are the differences once I've read those. And the main differences in the submissions related to Mr. Lett from CBRE focused his primary rental evidence on whole or predominantly whole floor buildings. Okay, and Mr. Robbins, he focused mostly on single floor buildings. And as I said before, I wanted to look at whole floor buildings. I was instructed to look at whole floor buildings. Sorry, I'll take that back. I wasn't instructed to look at single floors. So they were leasing the whole building, so I looked at whole buildings. The car park rents, they differ a little bit, but look, it's not really much. Right. The landlord's contribution, which I've talked about. And then the final thing is the level of incentive that's given to new tenants, so vacant tenancies or existing tenancies. Okay. So, just to recap, we've gone through the facts of the building. Okay. We've had a look at the lease. They've told us what that, or interpreted that in terms of what the instructions are. Okay. I've drilled down into the specifics of the rent review clause. I think I understand that. I've referred out any questions to the barrister or the QC. Right. I then read both of the reports, understand what the differences are. Okay, so I've got everything I need. Probably not much more I can do in terms of examination of the issues. So from now, I've got to go and do the work. I've got to go and understand the market, understand the deals, and compare them to the subject property and determine the rent. So what do? First thing is I look at the market. Okay. I'm interested in some of the facts. What's the vacancy rate like? Why? Because it's an indicator of the strength of the market. High vacancy, weak market. Low vacancy, strong market. Okay? And I'm looking which way it's trending. Okay? I'm looking what the agents are telling me out there in their market research. You can see here, they're pretty consistent actually in terms of what are incentive levels. This deal here, right? We analysed this one to a 37% incentive. Right? What are the agents are telling me? Well, the Property Council of Australia, they're publishing that the market's running at a 30% incentive. Savills 35 to 40, Knight Frank 35, CBRE 36, Collier's 36. Pretty consistent, right? Not a lot of difference between the agents. Went the wrong way, sorry. So market commentary, right? Who's taking up the space? All of this sort of stuff I'm looking at. Major projects coming on board. So that's about it for the market commentary, all right? So we know that the market's okay. It's got a 10% vacancy. The agents are fairly consistent in terms of what the office take-up rate is and what the incentive level is. So then, understand the market. Now I'm actually going to start having a look at specific deals, and these are my benchmarks. All right? I'm going to start comparing the most recent deals in the market. Okay, and here's a write-up that I've done on an analysis of a lease. Okay, and I'm not going to read all of these because there's about 5 or 6 of them, but I'll just go through one of them. Okay, so here's a building. It's at levels 2 to 11. Level 14, level 16, level 17 and 45 Perry Street in Adelaide. It's not a bad building, but as you can see, it doesn't look as new as ours. So instantly, it's probably thinking it's not as good. It's in the CBD. It's 19,855 square metres of lettable area. Built 89, 71 car bays. The landlord spent $13 million refurbishing it, and it's got a 4.5 star neighbours. We've got a 5.5 star neighbours, so ours is environmentally better. The tenant in that building was the Minister for Transport, the South Australian Government, that commenced in 2007, but they renegotiated the market rent in 2017, September 2017. And it's the rent which was done as a gross base basis, $534 a square metre. 3.5% reviews. Now, it had an incentive, interestingly, of only 7.5%. Okay? I'll come back to why that's interesting pretty soon, 7.5%. And here's what I say. It's 23 years older than the subject premises. It's inferior accommodation, and it's inferior in terms of its quality, its specification and its energy efficiency. The floor plates of 1,115 square metres are inferior to the subject. It's in a comparable location with frontage to Pirie Street and another frontage to Gawler Place. The tenant, the South Australian Government, was in occupation under an existing lease from September 2007, and then together with the landlord renegotiated a new rent from September 2017. At the same time, they renegotiated the removal of the make good clause with an estimated liability of $3 million, equivalent to a gross incentive of 7.5%. Our inquiry suggests the tenant was not in a strong negotiating position due to time constraints and the occupational requirements of the tenant. They had nowhere to go. The tenant, the South Australia Attorney General, has agreed to relocate to a new building in the GPO on practical completion in late 2019. We understand Charter Hall agreed to pay the lease tail of the Attorney General's occupation lease at 45 Pirie Street on relocation. Okay, so you can see here by the write-up that I've gone to a lot of effort in understanding the exact particulars of this lease and this deal, almost as much as I have when I've done the analysis of my lease, okay, for the subject property. And the reason why I've got to know all of this information to make a true comparison. If I don't know the facts, I'm not going to make a valid comparison. I'm going to get something wrong. So I know this by ringing the landlord and the tenant, the two people who did the deal, and I said, you know, tell me, can you tell me about the deal? Can you tell me how much people paid? You know, what was the terms, and so talk about turning up at, this event on Thursday night and making your contacts. This is what this gets you, I can ring my mates in the industry, the guys who I went to uni with. I said, I'm doing this job, this determination in Adelaide. I've heard you were involved in this transaction at 45 Pirie Street. Can you tell me the facts? And that's the information you get. So go to this stuff, right? Like you're going to make contacts in the industry that's going to pay for this sort of stuff 10 times over. But I'm doing this for multiple properties, okay? Very, very similar properties all around Adelaide. But when it's all distilled, you end up putting together, data, comparing across assets that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay? 9 comparables in order to determine my rent. And these are the things that I've had regard to. The address of the property. It's a matter of fact, sure, but it'll tell you pretty quickly, is it a better or worse property? The type of lease. Is it a new lease to a sitting tenant? So is it vacant? Or was the tenant in fact in place at the time? I'm being told only to have regard to vacant premises. Right? The lettable area. Okay? Beggars can't be choosers. All right? I've included some stuff, some single floor tenants Right? But I've also got some big lettings like mine, 15,000 square metres there, 15,700 square metres there, 11,000 square metres here. Right? What's the gross base rent? Interesting, right? But I've been told to do it on an effective rent. I'm not doing it at the 550 a square metre, I'm doing it at the 325 a square metre. Okay? So I'm doing it at this line. And then I've called out a couple of situations here that I think are anomalies and put a circle around them and highlighted to the reader my opinion on these. Right? Why have I done this? Because this is what the landlord was holding on to. The landlord was telling me that the market was running at incentives of 7.5% and 16.5%, and I should have regard to those deals. Okay, that they should form the primary basis for my determination. Put your eye down these, have a look. What are the rents? 287, 338, 503. Right? What are the standout ones? What are the ones at the high end of the range? Right? This one here. 503, 441 a square metre. If you take them out, what do the rest of the deals show you? Right, they show you about 441, no, they show you less than that, don't they? They show you $354 per square metre or lower. Okay? But of course, to the landlord, who say, no, look at this one, look at this one. You know, they're very similar deals. They're similar in terms of size, right? They're similar in terms of date, right? They're the ones that you should have regard to. Okay? But why did I not? Anybody want to have a guess? Yeah? I did not, because those two tenants, sitting tenants, new lease to sitting tenant, option renewal to sitting tenant, a tenant who was already in occupation. What was I told to do in the lease at the beginning?
Vacant possession.
Exactly. I was told to assume vacant possession, right? What are all these deals? New lease, new lease, new lease, new lease. They're all new leases. What's the difference in the incentives being given to new leases, given to new tenants and sitting tenants? It's massive, right? These guys, a new tenant is getting double, triple the amount of incentive in the lease, right, to a sitting tenant. Why? That's the inequity in the bargaining position. It's happening in those. But I've specifically been told to assume vacant possession. If that hadn't have been in there, what would have I done? I could have been at liberty to take into account any of this, right? But that wasn't the situation. I was told I needed to do new ones. So, what have I written here? I've called it out. 45 Pirie Street and 60 Flinders Street demonstrate low incentives. Both transactions involve agreements with sitting tenants, which is an important distinction. The subject lease requires the presumption of vacant possession. This is further discussed on page 38. Okay? Car parking deals. Whole heaps of examples here. There's your tenants. Look, you can see here they're ranging from a cheap 375, but they're on the outside of the building. You know, 550 for 3, 492. You know, 375 a month to $550 a month, pretty much. Storage, similar, 150, 152, 295. You know, not a lot of, but clearly different space, different locations, different rental rates. So, let's get down to the answer. What did I do? What is my basis for determination? The quality of the premises. I said we have a very, very good building. The size of the tenancy. Right? I've determined the rent on a whole building basis. Why? I haven't been told to do it on a floor by floor, and they occupy the whole building. The location. I've had regard to the location, where it is in the city. Is it in a better or worse location than the other buildings? The date of the transaction. The market moves. Do I have to bring the ones that were negotiated in strong market back to the relevant date? I do. I've got to adjust them backwards for time. make good clause. I said no, make good clause in ours. Some of the other deals did. So I did a financial adjustment for that. Repairs and maintenance, rent review structures. The subject property had 3.75% rises every year. Most of the deals were only being done on 3.5. Okay, you do an NPV analysis, 3.75 is better than 3%, so you can make, a financial deduction for that. Analysed on a gross rent basis. Not doing it on a net basis. I'm having regard to the fact that the tenant doesn't pay rent plus outgoings, it pays rent including outgoings. Okay. And the vacant possession. Okay. You can read all of that, but this is the summary. I'm of the opinion that a tenant negotiating on a premises which was hypothetically vacant at the relevant date would have negotiated an incentive in the order of 30%. Okay? So, not the 7% or the 10% that was being put to me by the landlord, but I've concluded a 30% incentive. Why? Because you go back 40, 35, 35, 32, 35, 32, 45. Might have been a little bit conservative, maybe it should have been higher, but ours is a good property. Okay, we've got the best property, so you generally won't have as big an incentive. Determination, righto. So, let's get into the calculation. This is basically this is my determination here. So for the office areas, 30,979 square metres. I came up with $403 a square metre. They added back $88 a square metre, which was basically the $25 million amortised over the lease term, equated to $88. Made $491. $150 for the basement, $500 for the car parks. Sum them all together, $15.69 million. Okay? But then I basically worked out that, the rent can't go down by more than 10%. I now need to do a cross-check, Am I below the 10% deduction? The fact was, I was, when you put it below the deduction, and so in the end I said that the rent, despite the fact that I've determined $15.693 million, that really the collar meant that it shouldn't be any lower than $17.276 million. So my determination is $15.693 million. I'm not determining the 10%, but I am highlighting that it shouldn't go down by more than 10%. So that's the number I'm signing off on, 15.693. And that basically brings the analysis to a conclusion. So, look, there's a lot to take in with these determinations. You can see how really micro you can kind of get on the issues. It is an area that you can't sort of start off your career in, I think. It actually takes a lot of understanding the issues and learning from somebody who's had a bit of experience in these types of things. But it is unbelievable just how many people out there get themselves into disputes regarding things as simple as what should the rent of the property be. And they need someone to go to in order to help them resolve that situation. And when I sort of dread whenever I submit these things to the landlord and tenant, and I'm going to get these phone calls blasting me that they disagree with this. I'm too high, I'm too low. What are you doing? But it doesn't happen. What happens is they say, thanks. Look, we were trying it on. That happens sometimes. But pretty much they're in business and they just want an outcome, and then they just want to move forward and understand that somebody who has the right level of experience, who's prepared to look into the issues, actually comes up and makes an impartial decision, and they can get on with life. Right? So it's quite it's quite an interesting area of work. You know, this is an office. There's another whole set of issues to do with retail leases. You know, you can imagine right now with the retail sort of changing and, you know, being a very tough environment right now. And there's a lot of disputes on with that too. So, so yes, I hope you've found that useful, and I'm happy to take any questions on any of the content that I provided.
Any questions?
How often are you seeing options to extend in commercial leases and offices?
Most leases would have an option to extend.
Same as retail offices?
Well, in retail leases, there's actually a legal right to have an option, whereas in commercial leases, there's not. But most do. Interestingly, an option to extend is only really a benefit to the tenant. It's of no benefit, you know, to the landlord, you know, because all the right exists with the tenant. But I would think in excess of 95% of leases would have an option to extend.
Do you, like, does the sustainability ratings have a big impact on like rents?
Not as much as you would think. Well, I take that back. In a situation like this, I'm trying to select other properties that are similarly rated. But as you can see, I called out that one comparable was only 4.5 stars and ours was 5.5 stars. So to that extent, yes, it does. But it's in the order of the magnitude of 5%, 10%, not kind of 50%, you know, differential. All the other stuff, like its location, its condition, you know, is still, you know, still just as important.
What are the main components that you've seen change the values or rental values over time? So I'm guessing, let's say 20 or 30 years ago, like neighbours would not have been a consideration in terms of a leasing. What are the components that you see that seem to have changed over the course of the last decade or two?
Yeah, the last decade or two has probably been incentives.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They seem to come and go in cycles. Look, I can certainly remember a lease that I saw years back. The landlord gave away, is a 12-year lease? The landlord gave away 9 years of rent-free. Right? So they were just, the market was just stuffed, you know. And then you come back into strong times, you know, there's no incentives at all. Now we're back into 30%. You know, so when you compare, so for example, sustainability, that might be moving the market 5 or 10%. You know, incentives that are moving sort of, you know, 30% are big.
So will you see that trend? So say if you're coming to do renew a lease renewal 5 years ago, and you go, oh, this lease was signed in 2015. Oh, that was rampant in terms of, you know, incentives or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you find those trends?
Yeah, definitely.
You can look at something and go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For one reason, I've been around for a while, you know, so I understand those cycles. But the other thing too, I understand that that's an important issue. And so what you do is you're kind of saying, well, let's ignore what happened in 2015, right? This is a 2017 deal. We're going to compare it to other 2017 deals because the fundamental of the market's completely different, you know. So it's understanding, what the issue is and making adjustments for time and that sort of stuff.
So one of Richard's EY paper is on incentives. It was 2017 or something. 2017.
Yeah, it's that 2017. Yeah.
So it's on the RNS now, so I want to read it. A lot more detail.
Yeah,
and expert base. One of my questions is about some of the more difficult property rental determinations with less directly comparables. Yeah, so if it's a historical building,
so it's hard.
that examples, certainly you have quite a few reasonably good to justify.
Yeah, that's right. You've really, in order to do this, you've probably got to know one or two things. You've got to know the market, and the market. You've got to have a market for something that's got to be active. Do you know what I mean? So, it's great when you've got all these things. You've done all those sampling, so you've got to make bigger areas of judgment. Bigger, if maybe it's adjusting something that's done 2 years ago or 3 years ago, right? So that's one of the things. But then if you haven't got that, you've kind of got to understand what's driving the market. Or how do landlords and tenants negotiate things. So, for example, in hotels, right, I've done a bit around, determination of hotels. Those hotels are done on metrics of, say, 40% of turnover is a typical metric for a hotel, right? That's a tenants can afford to pay. So you can go, often many years without a comparable transaction. But that 40% of turnover has lasted, for 20 years, 30 years as a metric that the market uses. So in that situation, your most important thing is not actually validating the 40%. Well, it is. You want to make sure that that's still right. But it's actually getting the turnover right, the top line number, So it's always possible. It just sometimes needs more judgment. Yeah. Judgment than others. Yes. Yes. So if I understand it, the question is, if we've got a lease that's only growing at 1% per year, and it's for 20 years, how do you take that into account?
How we can influence the amount for increase every year in the processing?
Yeah.
Because, for example, if we just choose like CPI, it could be 1% people want to go beyond the CPI or 2% or 3%.
Yeah.
Because this very difference is quite interesting.
Yeah. Really good question. And so just for everybody else in the room, so if I've got the question right, it's about how do you make an adjustment when you maybe have a long-term lease that has a low increase in it, like a 1%, maybe when the CPI is running higher or something like that. And the way that you do it is through basically financial analysis that looks at an NPV basis, okay? So what I would do is if I had a lease, the situation that maybe only had a 1% increase, and the rent on... Can I turn this off so I can...
Yes, sure.
Can I turn off? Yeah. So if I had a situation maybe top line here where my rent is basically going at 101, 102, 103, 104, I could do an NPV of that rental stream using Excel pretty quickly, and I might use a 5% discount rate, and I'm probably going to get something like, about $480. Oh, sorry, try again. About $480, let's say, at about a 5% discount rate. Now, if you say to me, but my lease that I'm doing has got 5% increases in it, where you've compared mine to a lease that has, you know, a 1% increase, with a 5% increase, surely you should end up with a lower starting rent and a higher end rent. So I'm looking to basically solve, I use a lot of what if formulas in this, for the same NPV, to achieve the same NPV, but using a 5% increase. So if I was to chart it, and I had a lease that was growing at 1% per annum, and say over 20 years, it's probably going to have a pretty flat profile, right? But I say, okay, but I'm comparing it to a lease that's going to have 5% rises over it, right? And I'm determining the rent, let's call it year one. Okay, there's a market rent review at year one. My lease has 5% increases in it, right? How do I make a comparison between a lease that has a 1% rise in it versus a lease that has a 5% rise in it? Right, I'm going to do an NPV analysis. So let's call it $100, right? 20 years, $2,000, 1% rises, right? But we'll do an NPV. I'm going to make it up. The NPV on that number, right, is, let's call it $1,800, right? But mine's got 5% rises. So what I'm interested in is solving for the NPV. So my rent is going to look like something like that if it's got a 5% rise in it. I'm interested in the same NPV of $1,800, but with a 5% rise in it, such that I would determine this rent maybe at $70, right? Because of the difference in the rise over time. Okay, so this is what you need to do. You need to be doing the analysis over the whole of the lease term. Not just saying, that property was leased at $100 a year. I'm going to determine my property at $100 a year. No, that property was leased at $100 and only has a 1% rise. For the same NPV, yours can be leased at $70. With a 5% rise over the period. Okay.
Okay, so if there's no more question,
I can be excused.
Yeah, we do have one exercise afterwards.
no more questions?
Good.
Okay.
I just want to restate again the information provided to you tonight for the purpose of the lecture is only for the purpose of the lecture. Okay, it's not to be disseminated anywhere. It's historic information now. It's not useful to anyone really, but I'm only providing it for the purpose of students. So if you do want anything in terms of information or anything like that, or you do want to share it anywhere, you make sure that you send it to me first and get my consent. And I'll generally oblige as long as I know what's going on. All right, everybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So we'll probably take 5 minutes break and come back to finish up.
Good, yeah.
Challenging.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's actually, it's one of those things that I think it's probably worth just understanding a little bit about, but I really, it takes you 20 years in the industry to really understand what's going on with a lot of it.
And still not
No. That's exactly right. Absolutely does. Now, have you given that out to the students? Yeah, sure. You can take it down and then take it down and I'll give you one. It's got the information redacted and you can load that up. Very good. All right. Thank you.